It's time for a reality check.
We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill, and we want to get into this lab series, and it only makes sense to start with thyroid, and we'll specifically be talking about more of the presentation of hypothyroid and or Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune hypothyroid, and I think that this is just very commonly presented to us within our practice, but also just quite frankly, the general health of the population, because it is largely driven by gut and stress. And you may have heard me say this before, and you'll hear me say it probably a million times through this series, that hormones are the check engine light, right? So we don't look at thyroid and say, thyroid's off, got to fix this marker. It's low, it's high, it's whatever. We got to look at, first of all, the full picture and the relation of those numbers to each other, and then the relation of those numbers to your symptoms, and then the relation of those things to your lifestyle and what your inputs look like. And when I say inputs, I mean you're working out. Are you over-exercising, under-exercising? Are you under-eating? Do you have underlying gut issues, right? So we have to tie together. So we want to go through how the thyroid physiology actually works, right? Like, what do these individual numbers mean? What the connection is amongst all of those. And just knowing that the thyroid gland, really any organ gland in the body, does not operate in isolation. All of our systems are connected, right? So it's really important to understand that from the big picture, that if something's off, it doesn't mean we got to go in and just like fill in that hole, right? We got to look at the whole system and say, like, are we compensating somewhere for something? Is there something else we need to prioritize first that led to this cascade? So I think that also my personal experience with thyroid I know so many people experience this. I went in with, putting in air quotes, hypothyroid symptoms, Googling for years, was told you're normal, you're normal, you're normal. And then when I learned about functional, I was like, okay, normal does not mean that I am functioning well, feeling good, and that I'm not symptomatic. It means that I am not in a diseased enough state to be medicated. And two very different things, right? And somebody can be suffering, for lack of a better word, for a long time with those symptoms and normalizing feeling exhausted and bloated and thin hair and nails and all of these things. And it's just your body compensating and sending you signals before you get to that point. And that's what we have to listen to ultimately.
And a lot of times we see the opposite also. So in Jill's case, it's like, hey, I know I have these symptoms. I'm pretty sure I have hypothyroidism, but it's not, my TSH looks normal in LabCorp standards, right? We also see a lot of the opposite, where somebody has a sluggish thyroid and then they're just medicated without considering their thyroid conversion and usage within their body. So we're band-aiding it rather than actually fixing it and getting your thyroid to work better on its own.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, full picture is like, okay, the signaling from the brain, the actual production of the hormone, the conversion from T4 to the active form, the transport of in the bloodstream, the cells, right? The receptor and cell response, immunity patterns. So we got to look at all of that. So thyroid is the body's metabolic regulator, right? It influences a lot of different functions in the body, including body temp, heart rate, again, metabolism, digestion, again, skin and hair things you'll see. There's a lot of components that are tied to this, right? And this function, but symptoms, a lot of you may relate with. And again, this doesn't mean I have hypothyroid because I have a lot of these symptoms, right? These could present very differently for a lot of different reasons, and there's overlap. But fatigue, brain fog, constipation, thinning hair and nails, cold intolerance, dry skin, low mood, poor recovery, weight gain, cholesterol dysregulation of some fashion, and even your cycles can be impacted through thyroid function. I have a client in a gut protocol right now, and she deals with really slow motility in terms of like bowel movements. And for me, I'm like, okay, we've done all this nervous system regulation work and we're balancing the gut bacteria, but we know you're hypothyroid. And I think this is a thing that we need to probably put more emphasis on at this point before we can go to the next thing. Now, generally speaking, I would be like, okay, gut first, hormones later. In her context, we've done all of that foundational work, and now we've kind of got to have some overlap there in terms of what we're addressing. So, again, these symptoms are a signal.
And a lot of times I think people are like, oh, my thyroid is off, so I can't lose weight, or that's the reason for weight loss resistance. So I want to address that as well. Today's episode, we're primarily talking about hypothyroidism versus like Graves' disease. The faster thyroid, we're not talking about that as much just because that's not as common in the population that we work with. So we're talking about more of the sluggish thyroid issue. It doesn't mean that a deficit won't work for you. But a lot of times if somebody has these trickle downs that ultimately lead to thyroid issues, which is usually like, okay, now insulin resistance is starting to become an issue. Now thyroid is starting to become an issue after this long stream of other things. Typically, if that happens and your primary goal is body recomposition, we just have to drop lower in the deficit sometimes. We have to be more strategic with rest and recovery. There's different levers that we have to pull. It doesn't mean that you can't, but it will become a lot easier for you if you can address this underlying stuff first.
Yes, love that. Okay, so actual thyroid process and function. So we'll try to keep this super simple, but it starts with signaling in the brain, and ultimately the hypothalamus releases TRH, and then the pituitary gland, I always say TSH is pituitary. So the pituitary gland responds by releasing TSH, the thyroid hormone, and then TSH then tells the thyroid gland how much hormone to produce. So this, in conventional medicine, a lot of times they look at just TSH and they're like, well, normal. And it's like, hold on, there's a lot of other mechanisms that happen within the thyroid that obviously you're going to hear, but like step one kind of stops there. They might go into the next one. So again, TSH is more of a signal hormone than anything. So TSH is one small piece of the puzzle. And then the thyroid gland primarily produces T4, a little bit of T3, but T4 has to convert into T3, the active thyroid hormone. A large majority, like 60 to 80% even, of that usable T3 is made outside of the thyroid through conversion in other parts of the body of T4 into T3. I generally say, all right, 60 to 80% in the liver and the gut, right, of that conversion. So you can see if you are producing the TSH, but the gland isn't responding effectively, okay, we've got this communication issue, right, that we need to address. So looking at just TSH isn't enough. And then if we look at, all right, we've got adequate TSH and T4. All right, you're good to go. No issues. That is I can draw a pretty hard line in the sand right there of where conventional stops. They don't typically look at free T3, which is the most important part because that's the active hormone. And then we'll talk about medication and the fish that we have to fry with the way that is handled in conventional medicine typically. But again, you can have a very low functional output and have, putting it in air quotes, normal T4. So then there's the transport and binding of the thyroid hormone. Again, I don't want to get too in the weeds. I just want you to understand the different components of the thyroid itself. But we have to transport it through the blood. It has to bind to carrier proteins, and then your cells have to respond, right, to produce the effect that we want the hormone to produce. So, even presenting again within normal limits or even within optimal limits if you're still symptomatic, optimal meaning a more functional range, a tighter range, which we'll talk about what those numbers are. If you're symptomatic, it's still worth looking at. If like, what is optimal for your body or what piece of this process are we missing? TSH, again, is pituitary signaling to the thyroid gland itself. I've seen LabCorp reference ranges on lab sheets anywhere up to 5.5 considered normal. We look at like 1 to 2 max, even a little less than 1 is great. But again, that sweet spot for each individual is really going to largely depend on the person and their symptoms and how they're presenting and how they feel. Again, a TSH that is even within functional range does not mean, okay, thyroid is great, we're good to go.
We're not only looking at that single number ever, we're looking at all of the numbers.
Yeah, no, and actually that's a great point too. Even looking at all of these thyroid markers we're talking about, that's still not enough to give us the full story, right? That's like, all right, we know there's a problem here, but what is the root cause? Like what upstream thing do we need to look at? So, TSH can be elevated in primary hypothyroidism, but low or even a little bit normal TSH can also occur in the same similar pattern. So
like my TSH is very normal. It's very optimal, honestly, but my free T3 and free T4 are both low. So there's some sort of conversion issue going on here, right? So I do take specific foods often in my week because I know it helps with that conversion process, right? So, yeah, getting back to, I guess, our
that's
functional
great,
ranges.
actually, the nutrients and minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Just a general side note there of like nutrition and how important it is that if you're not getting a good balance of all of those nutrients, which let's be real, we're not here to stress you out and say like, all right, you got to look at your calories, your macros, and now you got to look at the percentages of magnesium and zinc and selenium and all those things you're getting in your food, right? Like we don't want to go crazy here, but it's just important to understand big picture why diet variety is so important and why eating enough is so important, which we'll talk about in a little more detail too.
And if there's an upstream issue, again, thyroid tends to be a trickle down from other things being off. It's not the first thing. You could be eating a great diet that has a lot of variety, but your body is super, super stressed, so your thyroid's off. Or you could be eating a great diet and have a gut issue where your body's not absorbing the nutrients, even though you're eating them, right? So that's where the why and the zoom out big picture comes into play. I have more than a couple handfuls of clients that I can name who, before we ever did functional coaching with, like, I was doing typical health coaching and we would go through build phases, doing reverse dieting, adding food, adding muscle, slowing down intensity, and their doctors would take them off or reduce their thyroid medications because it was naturally improving on its own. So again, just from behavioral changes, reducing stress, this stuff can improve. Then there's also those clients where it didn't improve. Okay, now we need to do these deeper dives and see what the root cause is.
Absolutely. So, okay, so we went over TSH up to this point. Total T4. This isn't typically one we look at functionally within our practice. It's, again, every number is helpful, that much more helpful in the grand scheme of things. But total T4 tells you how much total thyroxine is circulating, including the bound hormone. But free T4 reflects the unbound, like what's actually available for tissues to use. So, conventional ranges, just again, the difference to know here is that they are a lot bigger ranges than, and functional ranges we look at are much tighter. So functional ranges, typically we're looking for free T4 to be generally 1.4 to 1.8. Again, it depends on the person, and it doesn't mean one number out of range, oh my God, something's wrong. I just want to make that clear. But free T4 helps you understand like what's actually available for your body to use. But the conversion is still the other side of that. So, and then
when we say conversion, we want to know both free T4 and free T3, which free T3 is the usable active version of the hormone.
Yeah. And then T3 total and free. So total T3 isn't like the most helpful marker. It can definitely add some context when we're looking at the big picture, but free T3 is really more where we want our attention to be, because that is the unbound, usable, and active hormone available for our body. So conventional ranges could be anywhere from, 2 to 4.4, even a little bit higher depending. Functional range, we're looking at typically 3.4 to 4.4. So you can see if you err on the lower end of that and you're not getting enough for your body to use, that can create an environment where you're symptomatic. But the biggest problem with free T3 is that it's like you gotta beg sometimes in conventional medicine for them to get your free T3. Then when we look at reverse T3, this isn't typically...
I've actually had that happen with my own doctor, who's very open-minded to ordering whatever I ask, where 2 years in a row, I asked her, I want my free T3, my free T4, my reverse T3, and she's gotten me my total T3 on accident because they just don't understand just didn't understand the why behind it. And I'm like, well, this isn't as helpful, right? So just
which is crazy to think about, though.
So specify that with your doctor. If you're asking for a full thyroid panel, I would say in order of priority, TSH, free T3, free T4. And then if you really suspect a thyroid issue and you want even more detail, we're about to talk about these two, but then I would add on reverse T3 and TPO antibodies on top of that.
Yeah. So reverse T3, we really want to see like sub 15 with that. Now, again, most standard lab panels don't include that. And honestly, doctors will tell you, not all doctors, I don't want to put everyone in a category. A lot of doctors will tell you reverse T3 is not clinically useful for diagnosing. And I agree in terms of diagnosing hypothyroid in a truly determining if somebody's in a disease state with that. However, it can be really helpful, especially if you are a stressed person. And remember, stressors, Jess kind of hit on this earlier, can be a lot of things. It doesn't mean you just feel stressed or that your job is hard. It could be you're under eating, you're over exercising, you have deeper gut issues that need to be addressed, right? There's a lot of things. But if your body is taking that free T4 and converting it into reverse T3, you're going to see your free T3 a little bit lower. So it's kind of shuttling it in the other direction. And that is largely driven by stress, and an elevated reverse T3 is going to be a major indicator of more downregulated metabolic function. Now, again, we can generally get the information that we need, and reverse T3 is not a typical marker that I would order just on a standard panel that we would run with clients. However, if somebody is coming to me with a long-standing history of thyroid dysfunction, or we're going through protocols and maybe not seeing improvements, it might be helpful at that point. Like, let's take a look at reverse T3.
Or if they're on thyroid medication for years, like if we know that they're already being treated for thyroid, like let's get a big snapshot of a picture. Also, I say a snapshot. Trends matter. Okay. So like I ask for those big three I ask for every year during my physical. Because think about it. If you're doing all of this health work and then you go get your physical and you're like, oh my gosh, oh no, my reverse T3 is too high. It might be lower than it was last year, but you never asked for it last year, right? So don't panic. Keep doing your healthy inputs, and then maybe in 6 months you retest and you see what the trends look like. Are they getting better? Or are they getting worse? Because that matters. And then in that case, great. Keep doing the path that you're doing versus worrying too much.
Yeah, and then the reverse T3 marker can also be upwards of like $75 depending on where you order it through. So again, like if we can do what we need to do and get that information, otherwise, great. It's just an extra layer that can be
and the
helpful.
Reverse T3, I don't know if you already said this, sorry if I'm being redundant, but is the unusable form of thyroid. So if your body is converting it to that more than to the other, that's when we know, something's going on that's wonky here.
No, I don't think I said that. So that's super helpful. Antibodies. So antibodies are going to tell us, okay, you can have a low functioning, hypo-functioning thyroid, but is there an autoimmunity driven component here? You'll hear me say this 8 billion times in this lifetime also, but autoimmunity is stress, gut, inflammation. All three of those things are present for autoimmunity to be a thing, right, for you. So TPO antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies are it's usually written as like TGA on your lab panel. We want to see those as low as possible. A lot of lab panels will put, I think LabCorp's panel says like less than 19. I don't know, it's kind of random, but it'll say like less than 19. So if you're anything under 19, it'll be like, all right, normal, you're good to go. And then anything over that, it would flag it. But there are times where maybe those aren't super elevated in big picture, and that could get neglected in conventional medicine. But for me, within functional, I'm like, okay, we're going down a path I don't want you to have to go down. Speaking from personal experience, we gotta get ahead of this before you are in a full-blown Hashimoto's autoimmune thyroid state. Now, my personal experience and case study, I know is not official clinical data. However, I never took medication for Hashimoto's. I am a very type A, high stress person. I had horrible gut dysbiosis at the time that I was diagnosed with Hashi's. It was kind of a blessing that my thyroid was swinging as much as it was, meaning I was going severe hypo to severe hyper in a matter of like 45 to 60 days. Now, I was so in the weeds and was able to order my own labs. So I was doing it every 30 days because I was like, I want to know what's going on. And I did it. I knew I was hypo. I had another panel that was hyper, and I was like, oh my God, this means I have to test again, because was this an error or did I swing that hard? So at the time, endocrinology actually wouldn't medicate me anyway. They chose not to, because they were like, hey, if we medicate you for hypothyroid, but you're swinging real far in the opposite direction, that could be really detrimental to your health, right? But it was a blessing in disguise, because I learned what was ultimately driving that pattern in my life with Hashimoto's. I went through a gut protocol, and really, definitely not perfect sitting here today when I'm talking about stress management and nervous system regulation. However, the awareness around it and knowing that that's in my control, my thyroid numbers are within normal range. Now, because I've been previously diagnosed Hashimoto's, I do need to be careful, right? I really, I can see a difference in my labs when I have more gluten, when I'm just less mindful of stress on my body and inflammatory decisions that I can make. But
that's actually a big one. I think, like, when someone is diagnosed Hashi's, that's one of my first recommendations is cut gluten, which can be a big lifestyle change if you've never done it before, because the wheat is in almost everything. You got to read labels to sauces and seasonings and all the things. But it can really make a major difference on your inflammatory response, specifically for people with Hashi's. So if that's something you struggle with, consider trying gluten-free. And we always recommend whole foods, not just gluten-free versions of processed stuff. But if you're going to make any dietary change, that's a big one.
Yeah. And I don't want everyone to hear this and if you're like, I have Hashi's, I should cut gluten. Sometimes it's something that's done temporarily, but from a functional perspective, we do want to see gluten pulled out at least until antibodies stabilize. There is not a lot of anecdotal research on this, and a lot of conventional practitioners, I think, would argue this in the context of something called molecular mimicry, and we don't have to get too in the weeds on that today, but the gluten enzymes, essentially the way the body perceives that when it comes in is attack mode, right? Autoimmune is your body attacking itself. So we have to, and then in the context of your gut and your gut lining and the gut junctions and leaky gut, gluten plays a big factor in that, which obviously then if your gut is inflamed and imbalanced and the conversion's not happening, whatever, there's a lot of reasons that there's overlap there. But
you said, sorry, I'm going to flip flop. You said there's not a lot of anecdotal, there's not a lot of like verified scientific research. There's tons of anecdotal examples. Like we have so many different clients that we've brought through specific gut protocols. Their results, I feel, are major when they choose to take out gluten during those first couple of phases.
Yeah, I would say the reason that doctors argue is they want like a study on PubMed.
Yeah, and that there's not a lot of. Yep.
Yeah. So that's really where there's arguments there. But for me, I'm like, okay, cutting gluten isn't going to kill me, right? So, but like if it works, and I've seen it work in a lot of people, and I have personally seen a lot of data through all of my time and years doing this, and personal research, personal experience with clients, other practitioners and their experience. That's a pretty easy thing. Like easy.
It's not adding any health value.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. And then when we're looking at conventional versus functional interpretation, we've covered this a little bit in the context of the actual numbers, but if you go to the doctor and say, I think I'm hypothyroid, I want labs. We've already talked about how that's generally not the full picture. They'll often do TSH and just total T4. Sometimes they'll do TSH and free T4, and they'll stop there. And if you are out of the standard conventional reference ranges, meaning they detect you are in a disease state and will clinically diagnose you with hypothyroid, they'll put you on a medication, right? Now, I'm not saying medication is bad. I want to be clear. I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. But when we go in, levothyroxine or Synthroid or some type of synthetic T4 medication is generally the first line of defense. Now, from a conventional perspective, I understand with the resources, the way that insurance works, a lot of factors that come into play in that decision making, where sometimes, and this is for any disease state, blood pressure medication, high cholesterol, whatever. Oh, actually, I'm anti-statins, but that's a different, we'll do that one in a couple weeks. But there are times where bringing in medication helps us lower the threshold so that we can address the environment and the root cause, right? Like there are times where that is really beneficial. If, I had a client who was on a fertility journey, was not working out, got thyroid labs, and they were through the freaking roof. In that case, yeah, like getting those numbers down in the meantime, while we have some decision-making process and look and testing and look at the bigger picture, that can be really helpful. But hopefully we've gotten this across, that if you're only prescribing a T4 medication or only taking a T4 medication, then if it's a conversion issue or it's a signaling issue from the pituitary, whatever the case is, then we're going to be at a disconnect here. We're kind of jumping in and altering one piece of the mechanism, but we're not getting the outcome that we want. Then if we look at sensitivity to medication, I have witnessed this happen a lot of times where T4 amount isn't the actual issue, but thyroid numbers are presenting worse. TSH is going up. Antibodies are increasing. So they're like, more. Got to increase this dose of levothyroxine. And we're treating the wrong issue. So I've seen that happen in a number of women, clients and non-clients, and we're not asking the right questions in conventional, right? And it's not their job, honestly, for these questions to be asked, which again is why I love functional, but we have to look at
we're never questioning or telling you don't listen to your doctor. We are trying to educate you so that, like, if you're a client of ours, we're trying to educate you on, hey, ask your doctor this. Because sometimes we'll do that and the doctor's like, yep, here's exactly why I did it and here's what we're monitoring, right? So sometimes it makes complete sense. And so it's always a process of collaboration and education, not how dare they medicate? Like medication might be necessary as you're transitioning it healthier and healthier. And then hopefully we can get that dosing down over time. But that's our goal, is to educate and empower.
Yeah, no. And we just want to ask different questions, right? Yeah. How is this person functioning in their day-to-day life? What are their symptoms correlated with these numbers? Is there a conversion issue? Is there a gut issue? Is there immune activity that we need to address? Are we in a stress adapted state? Are they falling within normal or functional ranges or close to, but still not functioning well, right? There's a lot of questions that are left unanswered when we're talking about things like this. And again, thyroid is certainly one of the most common. Not to mention, if you are a female with heading into perimenopause or premenopausal, or you have digestive issues, or you've been under eating or low carb for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? Like those are all things that we need to consider in the big picture. Now, there are a couple of factors that we look at when it comes to thyroid health specifically when we're digging deeper, right? Liver is a huge component because, again, liver and gut, because the conversion, a large majority of that conversion from T4 to T3 happens in the liver, right? So there are enzymes that help regulate that thyroid hormone availability. And I think too, when we talk about liver, a lot of people look at like ALT and AST and they're like, oh, those are within normal limits, you're good to go, no liver issues. But we have to look at overall toxic burden in our life. It's interesting. I was actually doing a call yesterday with another facility for lab ordering Zoomer tests, and they have these toxin panels where you can look at like glyphosate and what your levels actually look like. There are, certain things in Idaho when it comes to farming, right? Like all of these different things that you have to consider about the area that you live. And then the toxins in your home, right? There's just a lot of burden now that there didn't always used to be, or we just have more data to understand it better. But that can put a big burden. And again, it's important to know that labs are not the first line of defense. Symptoms are generally an earlier sign, right? So your body can be compensating and holding strong and keeping those levels normal. But like, if it's in a state of compensating, you're not going to feel great, even if labs are presenting normal. You're going to kind of be in that in-between stage where you either address things and pull it back and optimize, or you go further into that space where you enter a disease state and now your labs are presenting differently. So I just want to make sure I explain that, because you can be congested and inflamed and overburdened, right, is the biggest one. but liver markers and associated markers might not be presenting fully in a disease state, right? That's obviously the point of this conversation. That doesn't mean everyone with a sluggish thyroid also has liver issues, just to keep that clear too. But there are, again, AST, ALT, cholesterol is another big one we want to look at because there's a correlation there, which we'll talk about. So hypothyroid can affect lipid metabolism, and elevated cholesterol can be a clue into the bigger picture of low thyroid function. And again, if I see elevated cholesterol, I'm also looking at liver and saying like, all right, are we overburdened here? Do we have a conversion issue? And then when it comes to gut health and thyroid, I think this is probably, I would say, one of, if not the most common thing we are presented with our clients is some level of hypothyroid and gut dysfunction. That is like the biggest complaint that I encounter in my DMs, certainly. And again, you need proper digestion and absorption to get the nutrients, Jess talked about this earlier, required for obviously a lot of functions in the body, specifically thyroid hormone production and conversion, iodine, selenium, zinc, tyrosine, iron. And then we also want to look at immune activation when we're looking at the gut, as well as the overall inflammatory burden on the body.
And we tend to recommend increasing nutrients in the form of foods, not just supplementing with those things. Like you don't need to go get supplemental iodine and rub it on your arm. Like you could more, I'm trying to think of things, like I know seaweed is one that I eat, but different seafoods have iodine. Some dairy products have iodine, iodized salt, right? Eggs. Selenium, a lot of times we will recommend 2 Brazil nuts a day. Brazil nuts have so much in them that if you eat too many, you can actually have too much selenium. So that's one that you can easily take and absorb it naturally versus having to buy more supplements.
Yep. And then the biggest thing that we see with hypothyroid presentation is stress, underfueling, and with or without overexercising, and just that low T3 pattern, right? Or low free T3 and or elevated reverse T3.
We've seen that quite a bit for women who are fairly healthy in lifestyle, right? Like I'm thinking of one particular case, and she's amazing. Eats so well, exercises 5 to 6 days a week. When we start to track and log her food, she's eating like 1,700, 1,800 calories a day. So she's not intentionally under eating or dieting or anything, but her activity levels are insane. She gets like 17,000 steps a day. She exercises 5 to 6 days a week. So for her body's activity level, she was under fueling unintentionally, even though what she was eating was really healthy. We took back intensity, actually dialed back steps, upped nutrients, upped calories to like 2,400 or so, and did an 8-month muscle building phase. This woman came to us for physique change. And her thyroid, she was like, this is amazing. I went to the doctor and they're lowering my thyroid medication I've been on for years, because naturally my own conversion is improving, right? So like a lot of times we're reducing stress through some of these basics without it being an intentional thing, right? She's not feeling overly stressed or anything, but the thyroid is paying the price over time.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Like under eating is certainly, no, we could test all the things, right? But at the end of the day, and we say this a lot with clients, at the end of the day, I can make you the perfect gut protocol, the perfect everything protocol. But if you are not eating enough food, this is one of the biggest fish I have to fry with like naturopath and the functional space in general, is that they're really quick to give supplements and sometimes even lifestyle recommendations or foods to avoid or this, that, and the other. But there's not a lot of talk about the actual calorie amount that you intake and making sure that it is sufficient to support your body. There are cases also where things are largely driven by gut dysfunction. And I've seen this time and time again where someone has longstanding gut issues. So they're like, well, I already cut out gluten and dairy and soy, and I can't eat this food or this food because it makes me bloated. They are naturally under eating, even though they're very like health conscious humans, because they bloat and they don't want to feel like that, right? Which is understandable. I've lived that life. So now they've got the gut dysfunction. They're under eating unintentionally because they have so much going on and they don't feel good. Now we've got this hypothyroid issue because we're under fueling, right? So
And sometimes
That's the biggest lever to pull first.
and sometimes it is intentional, and it's a hard balancing act when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm having a challenge losing weight because I have these thyroid issues. So I'm trying to be in a deficit all the time. And it's like this seesaw where people go to one end of this extreme, trying to diet because their body's not losing weight. Meanwhile, that's a stressor that's making your thyroid worse and worse and worse versus saying, hey, let's pause on the physique goals for like 6 months, focus on nourishing, help improve some of this stuff. And then when we go to diet again, it is actually going to be easier on you, because a lot of times it's like we are gripping the bat too tight because we don't want to give up this goal of weight loss, even if it's just for a temporary period of time. And then it ends up stressing your body more.
Yeah. And then like when we're looking at other markers too, like if you are in a stressed state and cortisol is truly elevated, right? I say truly elevated because a lot of people are like, I have high cortisol, and it's not always the case. But we might see elevated cholesterol, right? Because when the cortisol is high, it's dumping fatty acids into the bloodstream. So we might see that. We might see glucose elevated or A1C elevated, right? Which is a 90-day snapshot or average of your glucose readings. You might see fasted insulin elevated. So now we've got stress, glucose is elevated in response to the stress, whether that's the under eating, whether that's your life, whether that's dysregulated circadian rhythm, shitty sleep, your trauma, whatever, right? Now your glucose is elevated. Now you're insulin resistant because your insulin's trying to get that glucose down, right? And then we see this pattern with thyroid, and then we might look and see markers that indicate chronic gut dysfunction on your blood panel, and then we correlate that with the GI map. So I want you to see how connected and intertwined all of this is. And we can't look and say, I have high cortisol, I need to drink fucking happy juice or whatever somebody's selling you on the internet. And it's like, yo, we got to fix whatever's driving this pattern. And yeah, now we've got all these things, but it's like, if we correct this first one, will we have a positive cascade downstream, right? So we want to go through this order to make sure, all right, we need to fix your gut, but can you detox properly if I walk you through a gut protocol? If you have immune activity and you have skin issues, eczema, something else presenting, I've got to look at, do I need to calm your immune system so that you can detox effectively, so that I can fix your gut, so that I can fix your thyroid, right? So you can see why that order of operations is so, so important. But all of that said, the biggest lever you can pull if you're presenting hypothyroid is making sure you're eating enough food first. Autoimmune thyroid patterns and Hashimoto's, obviously, we've talked about this. So there's hypothyroid where you're just hypothyroid, and then there's Hashimoto's where there's an autoimmune component. So your immune system or your body is targeting that thyroid gland for whatever reason. It's generally not a thyroid issue. Still, it's something else has driven your body to attack that gland. And you'll see that with those elevated thyroid antibodies. Well, when you get your labs done, typically. And again, I've seen, there's actually a percentage of the population based on what my endocrinologist communicated to me, where somebody can be diagnosed with Hashimoto's and not have elevated antibodies too. It's just the way that it presents, right? So again, you're like, great, I thought that was the answer to my problems and I could get diagnosed that way. But it really, you have to look at the full clinical picture, and it's so important to understand that too. And then again, we talked about this a lot, discussing like upstream considerations, immune dysregulation, gut permeability, infections, inflammatory burden, stress load, your work, your lifestyle, your inputs, your nutrient and or calorie depletion. So it's very complex, right? We have to look at the full picture there. And then again, cholesterol is another marker that can support thyroid interpretation or patterns of hypothyroidism. So there's an impact there. So if we see, elevated cholesterol, we see cortisol elevated. Again, we're not just looking at that marker and saying, oh, that's a problem. We're looking at saying, all right, what in life or what other upstream thing can I look at to see where this is starting? Ferritin and iron markers. We can also look at, is your body, again, does it have enough of the nutrients to absorb things properly? I feel like iron is another one we're seeing more commonly where there's a disconnect between the actual iron levels in the body and then ferritin levels in the body. So actual storage of the iron. So like, is your body getting enough? Is it storing it properly? Is it using it properly? So again, there's some overlap in the nutrients that can support all of those functions, within the body that are important to understand. And then liver enzymes, obviously inflammation markers, homocysteine is underrated marker, I think. And then CRP, C-reactive protein, we want to see that under 1.
We always order that for everybody. And that's one of those things where I've had clients who are like, no, my doctor won't, like, can you order it? Because my doctor won't order it because I don't have a specific heart risk. And it's like, yeah, but it's a good inflammatory marker. And we can do so much to reduce systemic inflammation that can allow your body to heal on its own. So even if we're not doing some like a GI map and a specific gut protocol for you, we can possibly, we take out workouts for 3 or 4 weeks and we swap it with slow yoga. Maybe we cut out some more inflammatory food things like added sugars and gluten and alcohol and things that we just talked about, right? Maybe we get you outside in the sunshine in the morning and going to bed at a reasonable time. So we're reducing inflammation just by supporting your circadian rhythm, right? Like there's lots of different things that we can do all at once to support inflammatory reduction, which also then makes everything else feel better, especially if you have Hashimoto's or if you have like immune system type flare-ups. It'll just add less stress burden overall if we can reduce inflammation first.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, you might even be listening to this and be like, my doctor doesn't listen to me, or this is so overwhelming, or where the heck do I start? If you haven't listened to our Finding Vitality Through Simplicity episodes, they're very recent prior to this one, highly recommend listening to that, because at the end of the day, managing stress, sleep, our biology is tied to the sun, so your circadian rhythm is super important. Having fun, play, joy in your life, getting enough nutrients, eating adequate calories, moving your body, connection, friendship, all of those things, right? Like that is going to drive you in the right direction.
In a healthier, you'll get healthier markers, period. And obviously, if we've already tipped the scale, it's going to be harder to dig yourself out of it, right? But at the end of the day, if we were doing all those things to begin with, these things wouldn't be an issue. These flare-ups wouldn't be happening because our body would be able to dispose of the toxic burden on its own at a rate it ought to be. And a lot of times, I know a couple people are going to feel called out by this, but I have a lot of clients who are like, yeah, but I'm doing all the right things. Why in the world is this marker here? And I'm like, okay, well, like, what's your stress look like? And they're like, oh, I'm frantic 24/7 and my house is a mess and my kids are crazy and my work and this. And it's like
I can't help it.
You're doing a lot of the right things with your nutrition, or you're doing a lot of the right things with your sleep, or you're doing a lot of right things with your stress, but neglecting those other two, right? A lot of times we're avoiding the thing we know we need to do. That's the one most important thing. And again, I'm speaking about myself. I'm raising my hand as I'm saying this because I am that way with sleep, where I'm great with my exercise, with my nutrition, with all these other things. And then I keep pushing sleep back because I'm like, I've got time, right? Well, it's like I might as well be smoking cigarettes in terms of taking years off my life every single day saying I'm going to improve it tomorrow. So like, really be honest with yourself and say, when you're listening to that episode, the Finding Vitality Through Simplicity episodes,
are you actually doing all that? Or are you thinking about doing all of that?
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Are you doing it, or are you like, yeah, I'm going to get to that because
I know what I should be doing, but are you actually
one thing that you keep neglecting, even if it feels, and I say even if it feels hard, because I think for most of the women that we work with, the hardest one is reducing stress, because obviously you can't just remove stressors from your life. But then when I say, let's add recovery modalities, let's add meditation or breath work, let's slow down and just look at the clouds go by for a couple minutes a day. They're like, oh, I can't do that. That's a waste of time. And you're not actually willing to do the thing that will biologically help you. It'll help your cells heal if you can slow down and not be in stress mode all the time, because there's a trickle down hormonally.
No, that's so good. I just thought of like a visual. So like your sleep, right? I'll give this example with Jess and her personal experience, but like if we're looking at a seesaw, right? And on one side of the seesaw, it's her nutrition, it's her quality time with her family, it's her managing her stress and parasympathetic inputs and filling her own cup, right? Nutrition, movement, lifting, all these things. So that's on one side of the seesaw, and sleep is on the other side of the seesaw, right? And that weight is like, I want you to picture like the happy good side. Yes, I'm doing all the right things, as like a 20-pound dumbbell, but then the sleep is like 100-pound kettlebell that's just weighing her down. And she's like, but I'm doing all of these things. And it's like, okay, but everybody presents differently, right? So we have to understand that that if that's the biggest lever she can pull, she can put all of this time and energy into those other things, but she can't complain if she doesn't feel good or there's an outcome that she's not getting, because for her, that's
pushing the gas pedal down on this other negative pathway, right? And again, I think I see that quite a bit with people who are doing all these things, but also clinging to being in a diet. Okay, you're clinging to this stressor just like I'm clinging to
the biggest lever.
Bravo late at night while I do workout programming. Like, it's like, what are we doing here? You're getting in your own way. So let yourself like actually take a break, even if it's just for a month, and see what happens. Because oftentimes you'll start to feel so much better and be like, I can't believe I didn't do this years ago. It was just really uncomfortable for the first couple weeks because I had to do something totally out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And in that context of stress, right? Like we've done several episodes about this, but sometimes there aren't stressors you can control, right? For me, I am working much longer hours right now than I'd prefer to, but that doesn't mean I can remove the stressors. There are things that I have to get done. The only option that I have is to fill my parasympathetic cup and recovery modalities, right? So mobility, lots of sunshine and grounding, meditation, right? Like those things will help offset some of that stress burden. At some point, you got to pick and choose, right? And if I start to see my labs and my mood and all those things go in the wrong direction, it's like, okay, it's not, it can only do so much to compensate. But sometimes you're in a season of life where it is a balancing act and you have to be mindful of that. Back to thyroid. I think that was a great tangent though. Interpretation mistakes. We've kind of covered this, but one, only checking TSH or, only checking like TSH and free T4 and saying, okay, check that box. Thyroid function is normal. Ignoring antibodies, ignoring low T3 patterns in a body that's under stress, underfed, inflamed, poorly converting, blaming symptoms on thyroid gland dysfunction in and of itself when the real issue is likely liver, gut, stress, immune activity,
lifestyle inputs,
lack of nutrients, chronic dieting. Something else driving that ship. And then the medicating with T4 only medication when there are combination medications. There are natural desiccated versus only synthetic thyroid medications. There are T3 only medications that require much more oversight from the prescribing physician. Ask your physician if you're in this place of medication being something you have to discuss in terms of your personal health of like, hey, there's all these options that exist. Why are you picking this one? And if we're looking at the full picture, what is actually best for me? So again, conventional only has so much they can do, right? And we have to understand that and make sure that we're asking them the questions that they can answer, but also advocating for yourself and your health and saying, hey, I don't want to just sit around and wait for disease to come. How can I be proactive about this, right? And again, this is why functional exists. So we're looking at full picture, the entire thyroid panel in relation to all of the other markers, gut, stress, the environment that the body is adapting to. We probably say that at least once an episode, but thyroid health is not about the thyroid. It's about whatever is driving your thyroid gland function to go down, right? Like what is broken in the systems all being connected. So we got to look upstream. So we don't want to reduce thyroid function to one marker or even a couple of markers. Like lifestyle and nutrition are the first things that we have to look at, and why we have blended functional medicine with coaching support, because I feel like that's really what people need and what they're missing. Now, a lot of people are not willing to be coached or not willing to make those changes. And in that state, medication is probably an option, right? It's the same thing in the context of GLP-1, where people, not everybody, but there are absolutely people who use it because they don't want to commit to the lifestyle changes that are required of them to get result. Again, that's not everybody. There are people that use GLPs responsibly and check all the boxes. But at some point, we got to look at how do we want to address this? Do we want to take a root cause approach? Do you want this to not be a problem? Do you want to feel better? Or do you just want something to take the edge off, right? And those are two different paths, and only you can answer that for yourself. So again, understanding the difference between functional ranges and conventional ranges. correlated with your symptoms, correlated with your lifestyle. In functional, we are not here to diagnose disease. That's not my scope. That's not my job. I'm not here to prescribe medications or tell you what to take or what not to take. I'm here to tell you, hey, before you get to a disease state, these are the things that we can do to improve your health and your quality of life. Or if you're in a disease state, we got to crawl out of this hole a little bit, but we can also make those same changes and get really incredible results coming from somebody who was diagnosed Hashimoto's, and now on paper, you would never know that was ever part of my history. So I think that's it. I know that was probably a lot crammed into one episode. That certainly could have been 3 hours, but I think that thyroid is, again, one of the most common things that we are presented with. So if you guys have specific patterns or things that you want us to cover through this series, obviously send us a message anytime.
And let us know how you feel about these series. Again, we're wanting you guys to be able, we get so many DMs about stuff where it's like, without knowing your full context, it's so hard to answer anything. So we're really trying to do this series where you can physically pull up your own labs and look at it and say, am I optimal or am I not? Or like next time you go for your physical, you can say, hey, doc, I want my TSH, free T4, free T3, and TPO antibodies. Can you go ahead and get that for me, right? So we want to educate and empower you guys along the way. But let us know how you feel about this versus our general topics, because we can always give you more of it. We know it's more dense to digest, but hopefully you guys feel good about seeing the why behind a lot of our recommendations.
All right, that is all for today's episode, and we will see you guys next time.